Last week, you received an email from me letting you know that I was taking a few days off, therefore, there was no video of last week. Now, I said to you in that email that I would share with you three things. One is more about that vacation, my quarter two review, and my quarter three goals, that I would share those things. Those are some of the things that I was planning to do. The one thing that I will say about the vacation, the time off, is that I had not planned to do that until a conversation with a good friend a few days before, which made me really confront a bad habit that I have had for a while and have tried to convince myself it really wasn't a bad habit. So very briefly, I have throughout my life not taken a huge number of vacations nor a lot of time off. Now, my answer has always been that I really love my work and my jobs, and so I'm happy to keep working. Now, that is true. That is a true statement. However, there is ample research, of which I share fairly frequently, about the value of taking time off. In fact, there's a thing called psychological detachment from work that really has demonstrated through research that completely checking out from work, not thinking about it, not being available for questions, not looking at email, has a tremendous amount of benefits. Not just benefits in our personal life, but also benefits in that work life. And yet, I was sure it didn't apply to me. So that's the short version of the story as to why I hadn't been planning on taking time off, and when a good friend politely, kindly, and bluntly called me out on it, why I made a different decision. So today I want to share the results of my quarter two review and my quarter three goals. That was one of the things that I did in my time off. And yes, that does relate in part to my business. Yet when I do a review, it encompasses all areas of my life. So this was much bigger than just my work. And I can do that review, honestly, without opening my computer or really digging too much into work. So this is the process that I use. I start by pulling out, in this case, my quarter two goals. And I look at the goals in part because that gives me an idea of what did I expect to happen in the quarter. Now, I do love stretch goals. They're not always single quarter goals. And yet what I've learned is that when I start by looking at my goals, it gives me an idea of what I was thinking, what I thought, was expecting to happen. So I start there. I then go through and I list my wins. What were the things that went well? And remember, this is across all areas of my life, not just my business. What would I call a success, a win? I am not only counting the big things, I'm counting progress. Sometimes they are tiny steps in the direction that I want to go. They all count. So I make that list and I go through it. I pause there for a bit of a woohoo celebration at the wins and the successes and the steps forward that I made, in this case, in quarter two. Then I go back and ask a very pivotal question. If you've followed me for a while, you've heard me likely say this before. When we stop at just listing what our wins are, we leave some of the most important things on the table. That requires a second look at that list with this question. What specifically did I do to contribute to this win? What specifically did I do? Now for years, and I've shared this before, for years I skipped that part. Does it really matter? It does. When we go back to identify what we specifically did to contribute to the win, we then give ourselves the information to replicate that win. Otherwise, the win can feel a bit like it's just luck. It's whatever happens. So it really is worth your time to ask yourself that question. What specifically did you do to create that win? Sometimes the answer is a system. It could be a book I read, something I learned, a conversation with someone. So there's a lot of different things that really are what I identify as my contribution to that win. Every single one of those are clues to further success. Be sure you do this. Once I have looked at my wins, looked at what I did, I then just look over the whole quarter. Just what do I feel? How do I feel about it? For this, I go through my journal entries. I journal nearly every day. It has a heavy focus on gratitude, and that's also where I record things that come to me, things that are on my mind, questions that I have, aha moments I put in my journal. So I just read through my journal looking for what leaps out at me. And then I move to this question, which does have a follow-up. What specifically do I want to do differently, in this case, in quarter 3? What specifically, based on all of this review, based on the wins and what I did to contribute and my journal entries, what specifically do I want to change in quarter 3? I've learned through the years to make this a fairly short list, or I sometimes make a longer list and then go back and really choose the things that are most important. Word of warning, it can be easy to get enthusiastic and decide we're going to change a whole lot of things at once. And generally when we do that, it's easy to get ourselves feeling overwhelmed and then we walk away from it. So if you feel a need for a long list, make a long list and then go back and really choose the most important. Here's the really interesting thing. When I went through and I made my list, it directly related to the vacation, the days off that I was taking. My highest priority item on what to change is figuring out how to create more margin, more space, more time off in my life. Now, the margin and the space for decisions, for creativity, for creating things, for learning and implementation, and just time off. Not doing work at all, having fun, or perhaps a bit of solitude. That was the number one thing. I don't think that was by accident, although sometimes I find it interesting the way the universe works. So once I'd identified that was my top priority, one of the things that I reflected on about quarter 2 is that I can be slow to implement. I make decisions, and in particular, if they are going to disrupt habits, routines, and systems, which certainly figuring out a way to create more space, margin, and time off in my life is going to disrupt those things. I have a tendency to hesitate. So I took it one step further this time, and I really feel good about this step. I went back and asked myself, what is the next best step to move myself in the direction of that goal? Just the next step. Tiny. I was looking for small things. I want to stack what I do so that I stay in motion of the implementation and yet keep myself from getting too overwhelmed that I just give up. I wrote down what I thought. Here's something else that I've learned. I then walked away from it. I just wanted to sit on it. I went and did a little gardening. Nothing that crude that I had any thought in my head. A bit of what I call a meditative task for me. The reason that I've learned to do this is in the moment, it can be easy for me to say, oh yes, that's fantastic, and then be much less in love with it when I actually go to implement it. So I've learned, and this comes from the book, either 10x is easier than 2x or Be Your Future Self Now, both of those by Dr. Benjamin Hardy. One of those two books talks about this question. Are we willing to uncommit from what we have to commit to what it is that we say we want? Am I willing to uncommit from my current systems, habits, routines to create more space, margin, and time off? And I've learned to pause to be sure what my answer is. Sometimes when I pause, my answer is no. And I go back and I adjust what I was going to do until I get a yes. Sometimes it tells me that is not for right now and to set whatever that thing is aside for a short period of time. In this case, I went back, I made a couple of tweaks, asked myself the question, am I committed enough to more space, margin, and time off to uncommit from my current habits, systems, and routines that are keeping me in the space of not much time off and not much margin or space? My answer was a resounding, heck yes. May have been a little different than that, but you get the idea. That is how I go through a quarterly review. And then what I end up with is when I decide what that biggest change is, then I go back with that in mind. And then I create the rest of my goals for quarter 3. It is no accident, I am sure, of the conversation with my friend that prompted me to take the time off. That arose in my quarter 2 review and certainly felt like it was the highest priority for quarter 3. That I see as a foundational piece. We cannot give what we do not have. So creativity and energy and all of those other things, I have to keep replenishing, or I don't have those to give to friends, family, my business, or anything else. So that is some of the results of my 4 days off. Now, I worked in my garden, I took walks with my dog Mimi, read a lot of fiction, baked some cookies, talked to some friends, and basically just unplugged and went along asking myself the question, what do I want to do now? Have a fantastic week. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.